This week, after 1 year, is marijuana legalization working? Also, is free dental and free pharmacare something our government can afford? I'm Glenn McGuinness, and this is Outburst.
The economy's tough. I'm coming from Alberta prospect, so we've had 5 years of tough go here, if that's fair.
We should have healthcare at our fingertips and accessible healthcare.
Personally, my friends are not going to the government site to get their marijuana.
There's a lot of love in this country, and I think that's how we're seen internationally.
October 17th marked 1 year since Canada became the first developed nation and the second country in the world to legalize the recreational use of cannabis. For many, it was highly anticipated, and the future for the cannabis industry in Canada seemed bright. But in the 12 months of legal pot, we've seen slower than expected startups for cannabis outlets right across the country, lower than expected profits right across the board, and despite good intentions of keeping it out of the hands of criminals. Statistics Canada says only 29% of consumers buy their product legally. So we sent this question to you. After 1 year, is marijuana legalization working?
No, because they still have black market. It's everywhere, no matter what. I don't have to personally drive to a dispensary to get it. I can walk down the street and get it. I don't know if, but I don't smoke it, so that's not it. But no, they don't. I don't think they're doing it properly. If they really wanted to do it properly, they would set the growers up to help them get started if they want to do it that way, and then could initiate the proper taxing and everything in between.
I don't see a tremendous difference in anything with the legalization of marijuana. I think that people who used it before, whether it be for healthcare or recreational purposes, continue to do so. Maybe the fact that I don't see any difference is truly an indication that it is working.
Quality and quality control is there, and there's more acceptance. So you know, some of us were talking about it when something's legal, it's the great desire to go after it is not there. So yeah, I think it's working.
The legalization has helped from kind of the black market side of getting it off the streets, but from what I can tell, it seems to be having a positive impact, and certainly from the medical side, it's becoming a lot more normalized as a recreational drug. I believe it's a lot more normalized, and the stigma is starting to kind of come away from it, but I think it's still early days, so there's a lot yet to be seen, especially as edibles and the next phase kind of comes to fruition. That'll have, I think, a bigger impact.
Like if we're looking at the use of CBD for medical purposes, I think that's always kind of been working because it's always required a doctor's prescription. If we're looking at recreational use, from what I hear, I think it's about 50-50 purchases. Lots of like the mom and pop shops that have opened up can't maintain supply, so lots of people that smoke go through their previous suppliers.
That piece bothers me when they've taken it too far. I see people smoking everywhere. You can see it in our community, and the air is filled with these. Some of the neighbors are smoking it now more so than ever, and it's just these are the things that those things bothers me more than if it's used for medicinal purposes. I think it's okay then.
I think so. A lot more people are taking to actually going to the stores and purchasing it legally. People appreciate the fact that it's legal now, and it's not as much of a taboo. So,
I guess so. I mean, tax-wise, we're collecting some tax doing it, but I see a lot of supply problems and getting the stuff distributed. I see that the black market is still very active, so it hasn't fixed that. Will it ever fix that? I don't know. It's been forever, right? So, is it working? Partially.
I think so. It seems like, especially now that there's more stores, it seems pretty readily available. So it seems like a pretty good deterrent to the black market. It's right there. It's legal. You're not going to get in trouble for having it. You can fly with it through, like within the country, obviously, that kind of thing. But it's especially, I think, in Alberta, it's worked really, really well.
Frankly, myself, it's been a big benefit because I've always been asked if it could help with some of my chronic pain issues. So now I can actually talk to an expert and know what I'm getting. so I'm not worried about any drugs being slipped into my marijuana, and I can actually get what I need. And I have noticed less young people smoking pot because I feel like it's just not as profitable to be selling it on the street anymore.
I think that we're still settling things out, and no, I don't believe we've actually had enough time to answer that question properly. There's certainly facets that are working from the medical standpoint, from the anecdotal evidence that I have. However, I would say that there's also a lot of abuse, and there continues to be a gray or black market sale of the product. So I think it's still a little too soon to tell.
Yeah, I think they're doing a pretty good job. They're just getting to know the process. They looked at Denver first, and so as long as they can model other places better than them, then I think we'll be a world leader. Yep.
So I've just come back from being out of the country, so I'm getting all of my information from family and friends. And no, they screwed it up. They did not have the infrastructure ready when it was legalized. And I think there were over 1 million hits that day. And I know personally my friends are not going to the government site to get their marijuana. So they're still going to other people. So has it been a success? No, I don't think this infrastructure was set up. I think it was the right decision. I think it was the smart move. And I do think we can be generating tons of revenue from the taxes, but it has to be set up better.
I don't know the statistics, but I expect the police are able to spend their time on more important things.
The price on the street is still lower in some cases than the price that they're selling it in the stores, but that's a matter of marketing. It's a matter of management, and I think eventually, if they focus on those issues, a year or two down the road, they'll find that they will reduce the amount of marijuana that's being sold on the street.
Who else but the government could lose millions of dollars selling pot? I mean, the whole idea was a dumb one to begin with to win votes. If the idea was to keep keep marijuana out of the hands of young people, well, it's like keeping cigarettes out of their hands. That's not working very well either.
Here in Ontario, there aren't enough shops to make it readily available. I live out in Canada. I've got about a half an hour drive into downtown Ottawa to get the nearest shop on Wellington Street. So yes, I think it's good. It's working, but it hasn't been done as well as it should have been done.
When was the first woman elected to the House of Commons?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I can tell you this, it took too long, that's for sure. First woman elected to the House of Commons, 1960?
1936.
I say 1999.
1975.
1972.
1974.
Your choices are 1867, 1921, 1958. 1867, 1921, 1958.
I'm gonna go with 1958.
58.
1958.
1921.
It is 1921.
Ooh, yay!
The 1921 election was the first where some women could run to be MPs themselves. That year, 4 women ran for office, but only one was victorious. Agnes MacPhail became the first woman elected to the House of Commons as Progressive MP for Grey Southeast, Ontario. Although she faced opposition from traditionalists and her own party, MacPhail remained in office until 1940. Historically, Canada has built a fine reputation for itself. After 2 world wars, Korea, and our involvement in Afghanistan, Canada has carved out a respectable reputation around the world. But just how do other countries look at us now? Do we enjoy the same kind of respect we have in the past, or has that changed? Our question. How do you feel Canada is viewed around the world?
I think we're viewed as a safe haven, a place where people can come from all around the world, seek refuge, start over, have safety, stability, and yeah, there's a lot of love in this country. And I think that's how we're seen internationally.
I think it's viewed as a rich country that is a guidance to other countries as well. And many people look at Canada to get an example how you could live together, how you could run a big country. So I think it's given a good example throughout the world, and it's very recognized and acknowledged.
I think Canada is viewed very well around the world. I think despite some of the questions people have about our Prime Minister or politics, I think generally Canada is liked. You can see people like Canada, they want to be here. They don't like the cold weather, but they like Canada, I think, overall.
I still think in many ways we're like always that peacekeeper, friendly country, friendly nation, that sort of thing. We might have taken some hits in like not so distant past, but I think overall in general we're still pretty favorably viewed.
I think in general it has a positive impression, a fairly clean country with more progressive values. It's a different story once you actually come in and look at the politics and at this moment how divisive things are. But if you look at a lot of external news sources, The Guardian, BBC, all of that, you don't see a lot of the divisiveness. There's maybe a couple articles running every other week that talk about the divisiveness, but not a whole lot. So definitely positive from the outside. It does paint kind of a false picture.
Well, I think Canada is still viewed very well around the world. I think we still are a desirable country. I think we're still a country that's progressive and still polite. So I think we're still viewed very well around the world.
I feel like we're viewed as very polite and maybe kind of, frankly, a bit of a pushover of a country in a lot of ways because we go along with what the United States wants us to do in foreign affairs.
I believe it's viewed generally in a positive light from a Western nation standpoint. However, we're no better, no worse probably than most G8 countries, and I don't think the world believes we're anyway special, just perhaps a little more secure than many countries around the world, both economically and from a security standpoint.
Definitely a very sought after place to live. I'm sure we go through phases a little bit of what the view is based on that topic and what government's in power at the time, whether it's from a defense standpoint, whether it's from a supporting third world countries or supporting the global community or involvement with NATO, that would go up and down based on the government at the time and how the economy is doing. But overall, I still believe Canada and the people of Canada are still highly respected across the world.
Oh my gosh, Canada is right up there as friendly people, kindness. I mean, all of the things that we consider to be stereotypes came from somewhere, and they seem to have really cemented an embracing and inclusive reputation for the whole country. People want to come to Canada because of its reputation for kindness.
Probably not with as much respect as we once were. Well, we've been involved in some things around the world that not everyone agreed with, and with social media, there's more awareness of the kinds of perspectives we take on things.
I've been to a few places outside of Canada, and they like us better than the Americans. We're friendlier, we're happier, we smile more, and I've been like the islands, for instance, like Jamaica, Dominican, and whatnot. They love Canadians. They prefer Canadians over Americans.
More and more Canadians are seen as being more complex, perhaps, than we once were, but still with a diverse perspective and an open and generous look at the world.
Well, that's a very good question. I've actually just returned from being in Ethiopia for 9 months, representing Canada with an NGO, and they're loved. The Ethiopian people adore Canada. They adore that we try to support them financially wherever possible, and we do send a lot of NGOs, skilled workers, over to Ethiopia to create sustainable change. Yeah, so they're very, very well liked over there.
I feel like we're viewed pretty positively, especially with like the police and stuff in our government. I feel like we're viewed quite positively with the world, except for maybe the States with Donald Trump. But besides that, I feel like we have a pretty good, yeah, that's the best word for it. Yeah, we have a pretty good image around the world, I would say, especially with the UN and with our government. I feel like there's nothing negative that I've heard from people coming into Canada.
Following an election that has left this country divided on the electoral map, Canada's economy will be a major factor when keeping our house in order. Pipelines will also be in play when determining our economic prosperity. We took to the streets to find out what you think about our country's finances. Our question: what are your thoughts on the state of Canada's economy?
Well, I guess it all depends who you talk to, you know. Like, I think some of the stuff with the free trade and everything with China, with the U.S., tariffs being put on, China putting tariffs on us, not buying our stuff, granola and all that, they used to be a big buyer of that, and because of the political implication in BC where the Chinese lady was arrested and still detained, that's hurting us. So, you know, like, it hurts all our economy, and it always comes back to the taxpayer, the little person in the scheme of things.
I think recently, the last few years, it's starting to make some good comebacks and its growth. In my view, I'm an Atlantic Canada guy, and the world that I live in and work in and am growing, we're growing. Development's been good, and the economy's been improving. From a kind of macro level of the Canadian economy, I think it needs to do a little quicker job of being stimulated and moving quicker towards growth. But locally, I feel like it's going the right direction, but it has a lot of direction that it needs to head in, or a lot of improvement that it would need.
I think it could be it could be managed better. So success is only valuable when it impacts everyone. And if the Canadian economy is only benefiting a few, then I don't see that as successful.
Well, I think we have a great economy, we have a great country, but I think there could be more to be done, for sure.
Yeah. Like what?
Well, my thing is honesty. And I prefer to have folks be honest about what they're doing and own up to the accountability for it.
Our economy, unless we really start making long-term goals for the future, I don't know if our kids will have much here. They'll be leaving and going. We have the brain drain. I know people that are getting their nursing licenses here and jumping to the States, and that's not good for our economy. So we've got to figure out ways to get Canadians to stay here in this country with their knowledge and their skills, and to boost it up so that the next generation has something to look forward to.
From everything I read, we're in a fairly good position. There's regional issues, I think, especially Alberta, Saskatchewan with the oil economy, but comparatively to other countries, we're okay.
The economy's tough. I'm coming from Alberta Prospect, so we've had 5 years of tough go here, if that's fair. It is tough. It will come back. We're resilient. I think the future is still bright, but I think we're in a slump right now, and I think it takes time. And people that are out of work don't want to hear that. I understand that. It's very tough for them, but I think we're okay. We're Canadians. We're resilient, and we will come back.
I mean, we've seen better days for sure. I think that we would be wise to purchase our own manufactured good. For example, oil. We need an Eastern pipeline, in my opinion. I think that, there needs to be some subsidized support for local business, local manufacturers, just all around. Yeah, it'd be better to buy local, sell local, and I'm not a fan of international trade.
I think it's a bubble that's about to burst. There just seems to be so many kind of like indicators here and there that things aren't going as well as they seem on paper. But also maybe that's just sort of the new economy that we live in. I don't know. But I think it's a bubble.
It's very interesting. I feel like we haven't done a whole lot to adapt to tech We're still primarily resource-based and energy-based, and you can kind of see that in the stock markets. Like, a lot of the forestry companies are not doing that well, and a lot of the oil and gas companies are not doing that well. And I don't think there's been more than, 2% growth year over year for, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years now. And so that affects a lot of people's pensions and things like that. So
very unstable and tenuous. Not simply the oil and gas sector that we see here in Alberta, but manufacturing, our dependence on a thriving American economy, and a good relationship with China. I believe all of those things are very much in flux, and I don't think we're very stable at this point. I would be moderately cautious with my money.
During the recent election, some of the campaign promises that stood out, especially from the Greens and the NDP, was free dental and free pharmacare. In fact, Canada is the only country in the world with a public health care system that does not include prescription drug coverage. Also, general oral health care is not included in the Canada Health Act. But would the notion of having these things covered be realistic? Or would taxpayers be left shelling out more just to subsidize it? Our question. Is free dental or pharmacare something our government can afford?
Well, in the present state, I don't think so. I think that anytime you make a new promise on something, there has to be some resourcing to go along with it. And it's not clear to me where the money is coming from. We're taxed at a fairly high rate, and that's good because we do offer a lot of great services in Canada. It's awesome to be in Canada, and so, but everything comes at a cost. And if you kind of if you just make promises willy-nilly because that's going to be appeal to a certain group of people, then that's fine. I guess that gets the vote. But, at the bigger picture, I think we have to look at what's coming in and where it's going before we start promising, new stuff.
At the moment, I think we can afford it. I think that we're creating revenue with our medicinal marijuana, and we've got revenue that way. We're generating it. And we have to put the money and allocate it into things like health, anything health related. And of course, the pharmacy, when it comes to prescriptions, there are people that just simply can't even afford the $5, $6 dispensing fee. These are students. These are people living off very little per month. And I would encourage it. I know the government can do it, and I think Justin will sort things out.
Afford, that's the big question. I think they're laudable goals, and I would like to see them explored pretty extensively to see how they would work and how we would pay for them. So I'm in favor in principle. I worry about the fiscal sort of imbalances that get created with them, but I'd like to see them explored.
I don't know, like provincially, if they could do it for everybody, but I think if there was some subsidy from the federal government, I think it's a good idea. I mean, especially with low income earners or people that don't work and don't have a dental plan at their work. I mean, it would go a long way to helping families for sure.
It's a part of our health, whether it be, oral health, mental health, physical health. We need to treat people in a holistic manner and include all of their needs and not pick and choose based on what our priorities are, or someone else's priorities. We should be able to have the opportunity to choose what kind of coverage we want and need, and I believe that the government should see healthcare as a holistic entity.
Look at the debt of the country, the debt of all the provinces across the country. I don't think it's realistic to do. I think there's a lot of improvements that can be made in our healthcare system as a whole, and whether that's more of a two-tiered system of those that can afford should be contributing and paying, but those that really can't afford, there should be some minimums there, but being able to spread that out a little bit more versus everything on the taxpayer, I think is a way that it needs to move.
We pay to live here. We're taxed up the wazoo, and we should have healthcare at our fingertips and accessible healthcare. I shouldn't have to wait 6 months for an MRI or a CAT scan or anything like that. And they shouldn't be forcing anybody to go and pay a different clinic to go get something done.
I think they have to be able to afford it. I grew up in the UK where healthcare was universal, and I can tell you just from our family's experience this summer, being in and out emergency in hospitals and surgeons, we would all be bankrupt right now if we'd had to pay for it out of pocket.
We got to be very, very careful because we're building all our promises on the backs of the next generation. And I talk with my kids in the kitchen while we're making meals, and they go, you know what, Dad, I don't want to have to pay for that in the future. So they're thinking about that. So it is very questionable as to whether it's affordable. It's affordable because you've got to take it out of paychecks of the people that are paying today, and we've got less and less people in employment today. So it's right on the edge as to whether it is or not.
Dental has such long-term health effects that we're probably paying more in the long term in heart disease and things like that because we don't have dental. So yes, I think we can afford it.
I think they can work something out. I think if they would, it'd be great. I don't know if they could quite afford it, but I know countries where they may charge higher taxes, but then these things are covered. So I think we're better than the States, maybe, but I think they can do something. I hope they can do for us. It costs a lot.
I think that human health is a right, and that's something that our country has been founded on. Looking after the human, finding the value in human beings is something that we need to make a priority. We have, and I think that we will continue in the future.
In what year did Indigenous peoples gain the unconditional right to vote in federal elections?
1984, maybe.
1990s, 1991, 92.
1963.
86.
I would say 1948.
Your choices are 1950, 1960, or 1970.
1970.
1970. 70.
Then 1960.
It's 1960.
Oh, here you go.
Good for you, sir.
Welcome.
The 1960s began with First Nations people finally receiving the franchise without having to renounce their Indian status and treaty rights. Inuit and other non-status people actually received the federal vote in 1950, but many had no way to exercise that right. It wasn't until the 1962 election that ballot boxes arrived in Inuit communities. That's all for this episode of Outburst on the Cable Public Affairs channel. I'm Glenn McGuinness. If you have any comments or questions about this show or any other show, you can find us on social media. You can also find us on our website at www.cpac.ca. It's your turn to speak up, and we're listening.